So in this video, I'll teach you how to use ChatGPT to address some of the most confusing concepts and ideas in qualitative research, and specifically in research methodology. And these include the concepts of worldviews and paradigms, including epistemologies and ontologies, as well as choosing your methodology between grounded theory, phenomenology, and other methodologies. And finally, the concept of validity of your qualitative findings. So specifically, I'll teach you and explain what kind of information you have to provide to ChatGPT so that it can help you choose these things specifically based on that information, on your study. So its responses will be highly tailored to your context, and you can then start thinking about these extremely confusing and difficult concepts. All the prompts and ideas that I share in this video, they come from my newest ebook, in which I explain how to use ChatGPT for dissertation planning and writing. I share so many more ideas at every stage, for every stage of your dissertation writing and planning, including developing your initial ideas and rationale, developing your research questions and aims, refining these research questions, testing the study through, piloting the study on using ChatGPT, using it for referencing, for working on proofreading and referencing and editing and formatting your thesis, as well as many other things. So choosing your methods and methodology, writing your interview guides, using it for data analysis. So feel free to check that ebook out. It's in the description. But now let's get back to the topic of this video. And we'll start with my favorite one, which is the question of paradigms and worldviews. And when I say my favorite, don't get me wrong, I definitely don't like talking about these things. This is far from being my favorite topic, but my favorite is the concept and the idea that you can use ChatGPT to get these difficult and confusing questions out of the way. Because the truth is, nobody needs to know about these things. I'm actually really happy that we can use ChatGPT, and I feel absolutely no guilt about it. The fact that we ask students to constantly talk about these things, these confusing and horrible terms, is one of the biggest lies in academia. You can disagree, you can criticize me, but I'll stick to my opinion. It's one of the biggest lies. I've been working as a researcher for more than 8 years professionally, and I've participated in hundreds and hundreds of studies. I never had to think or talk about these things. Now, I do understand that these things, they do tell us about our philosophies or how we approach the reality, what methods we choose. It does communicate certain views about the reality and what is knowledge, what is reality, how to address that knowledge. My point is, and I agree with that, it does communicate that information. My point is, you don't need to know that. You don't need to know what it communicates, and nobody does it. Nobody does it apart from or beyond these initial academic steps that students are taken. So if you're later publishing, if you're later in research, if you're working in research, especially beyond and outside academia, nobody ever wants to know that. And even academics, unless you're specifically interested in these topics, they don't talk about it in their published research, in their publications. It's not required of them. So students are required to think about these things. They're made to believe that these are the most important things in the world, but they are not. So like I said, I have absolutely no sense of guilt. Let's use ChatGPT by all means to help us address these things if others can't help us do it, because there are so many conflicting views and definitions in books. So let's just see what I've done and how we can use ChatGPT to specifically address these difficult concepts. So what you can see now is ChatGPT, as you know. And basically, what you have to do. So, how do we talk about these not methodologies, but these approaches and paradigms and worldviews? So, what I used for this particular study is are extracts from a published article, because it already has it all. It has all the descriptions of what we did and all the methods and everything that is needed. This kind of information communicates what I previously mentioned. So these worldviews. So how you feel about the nature of reality, what you believe about the world, how it's structured, what is knowledge, and how to assess that knowledge. If you want to know more about these paradigms and ontologies and epistemologies, I do have a video. It's pretty popular, and I did my best to explain what this is. Again, don't get me wrong. I understand it does make sense. All these things do make sense. What I'm saying is that you can do your research perfectly well without having to talk about these things. But since you're in academia, most likely if you're watching this, you probably do have to talk about it. So as I explained in that video where I explained these concepts, the way it interconnects is what you believe about the reality, whether you believe it's fixed or unstable or maybe dynamic and subjective and depending on people. What you believe about this links to what you believe about the ways to assess that reality and specifically knowledge within that reality. So ways to explore it. So this will determine whether you're using scientific and objective, so to speak, and quantitative methods, or maybe you believe that the best way to address and assess that reality is through methods that deal with individual ideas, opinions, experiences. So that's kind of in a nutshell how it relates. So to be able to talk about and how you normally talk about these things is of course through looking at the research design and what you actually want to do in your study. That's why I also quite often say that it's not entirely fair that quite often students are asked to talk about these things, these worldviews, before they actually conduct their study, because usually you have to write that section before that study. However, it actually becomes much clearer and easier to see what this is all about after you're done conducting the study, because then you can reflect back on what you have done and prepare these answers for whoever wants to read about your philosophies. And this is important because if you want ChatGPT to give you some suggestions and tell you about these worldviews and help you choose what seems to be the most suitable to your study, or what seems to be reflected in your decisions and your methodology and research design, of course you have to provide ChatGPT with as much information about your study as possible. And as you can see, this is exactly what I did here. So I generally just pasted everything I could find that's relevant about data collection and research design. So you can see there's a lot, and at the end, you can do it at the beginning, of course. My prompt is right here. So based on the information about my study so far, briefly explain what philosophical worldview, epistemological stance, and ontological assumptions it reflects. Ask me questions about the study if anything is unclear. So that's important as well, because you want it to ask questions. Ideally, I would also add, I added it to other prompts. You can also instruct ChatGPT to provide some references when it gives you that response, because firstly, you want to know if it can be trusted, and secondly, these references will be important for you when you want to later draft your response or draft the section in which you talk about these worldviews. Now, one more thing is that, of course, you have to treat these responses with caution. I'm not saying just to uncritically just repeat whatever it says to you, because, well, for many reasons, it has become a yes man. I said it several times. It likes to please the user. Sometimes it just gives you absolute nonsense. So you always have to be careful. You have to see what it actually gives you. But this is a start. It's better than not knowing anything about these topics. So anyway, you can see what it does here. So, I'm not talking about these, and we were not talking about these things in that article. I already said that nobody talks about these worldviews in an article, so I can only guess how accurate it is. I would lie if I said I love talking about these topics, but overall, it does seem to make sense. So you can see the kind of response it gave me. So it appears to be pragmatic, which is something that I often recommend to students, because pragmatism is basically a very practical worldview, and it promotes the application of what works. That's literally what it says. It's a quote, what works approach, which means just being practical, and that's the most important thing. From my videos that that's what I value most about any methodological approach, just being practical. This study was based on, it was a mixed methods study, so it had different methods, that quantitative and qualitative methods, which again is, and pragmatism is the most often cited worldview when it comes to mixed methods studies. Some people say mixed methods studies use combine different worldviews like positivism and interpretivism. Others say it's just pragmatism, because it combines all these things. Anyway, you can see the response. Then it's talking about epistemological stance of interpretivism. However, there is also some post-positivist strand. It's detailed enough to me, and as I said, nobody likes talking about it. If your response is that detailed, unless your examiners, supervisors are people who are deeply passionate about these topics, nobody will point anything out in this, because it's detailed enough. But like I said, you do want to give it a proper look. You don't want to use this as your actual section or chapter, it's a good starting point. You can use it, of course, but you'll be flagged. I do have a video about addressing AI content and how to humanize it, but it's a good starting point, something for you to consider, and then maybe start writing. And what I like, so I did tell it to ask me questions, so of course it did. Like I said, it will please me, but I like this part here. So it's asking questions. Did you treat your quantitative data as purely descriptive or as evidence of generalizable trends? And this will affect whether it's pragmatism or post-positivism. Would you say you believe that participant responses reflect reality or co-constructed meaning in a specific context? So that's again probing me about what kind of worldview I'm leaning towards. Positivism, interpretivism. So what's the role of the researcher in that study? Do you see your studies aim more at understanding multiple viewpoints, which again, is more about subjectivism and subjectivity and the role of people in the process, or informing concrete recommendations? So all these questions also, obviously I can now engage in this conversation and continue to draft. This is the first response. This is brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant. I can now talk to it and continue to draft my responses. It's 100 times better than what I had to go through, and many of us had to go through, trying to find these answers in the books that are not consistent, and there are so many different opinions on these topics. So it's absolutely brilliant. I absolutely love it. I hope that you do too. So now let's move on to the next one, which is methodology. But before we continue, don't forget to check out my website for all sorts of support options that I offer, including Zoom tutorials, data analysis support, editing services, humanizing services, as well as a list of different ebooks that I have written, including the ebook about using ChatGPT at different stages of dissertation planning and writing, or the ebook about using ChatGPT for data analysis. So it has all the prompts and detailed instructions for how to use ChatGPT for the whole process of coding and thematic analysis. So now let's get back to the video. So here again, I do have a video about methodologies, what they are, what kind of methodologies you can choose from. So the most common ones would be grounded theory, phenomenology, ethnography, narrative research, and case study. I do have a whole video about it, but methodology, again, this is important. Methodology is important. It's basically like, as I like to explain, it's like a framework that you apply to your study. So it's a framework, and on that, and this framework, determines several other decisions, or maybe the other way around. So I'll rephrase it. Your decisions, or what you do in your study, essentially may fit a certain framework. So you don't want to start with methodology and then try to force your decisions into that, but it's the other way around. So the way you plan to approach your study sometimes just happens to fit a certain methodology. Unlike the paradigms and worldviews, this one actually is important. It's an essential, a core central element of your study. So it's useful to know these things. And like paradigms and worldviews, it's definitely something you have to talk about. And just like worldviews and paradigms, it's something that quite often confuses people. So for this one, I chose parts of my thesis, my PhD thesis. I thought it would be fun. My PhD thesis is a constructivist grounded theory study. It has elements of it. So I never claimed it's a strong version of it. I always advise you to use this kind of cautious and careful language. So it's better to say, I drew from it, I base my study on principles of constructivist grounded theory, because then you can always explain why maybe some elements are not the elements of traditional approach, grounded theory, or whatever it is that you claim to be using. So anyway, it was predominantly a grounded theory study. So here is my prompt. So here are some statements about my study aims and rationale. By the way, all these things, so now I'm using obviously the things that I've already done. You can, if you're planning your study, if you're at the stage of research proposal, or you're just beginning your study, imagine, you can do the same things, of course. I have much more data to support this with. I just pasted everything that I could find, anything that I could find that's relevant. But, and of course, the less the less evidence and material you have to work with, or you give ChatGPT to base its response on. So you have to be careful again. and you won't have as much to provide as I do here because it's a finished PhD thesis. But it will be useful regardless at different stages. So based on these statements, basically my study aims, rationale, a little bit about research design. Based on this, can you tell me what's the most suitable methodology? So grounded theory, ethnography, phenomenology. I just provide an example because some people, some classifications call this something else, not methodology, but approach, for example. So that's why I said what I actually mean by methodology. Ask me questions if anything is unclear and support your answers with relevant literature. As you can see, there is a lot that I pasted, so everything I could find from introduction and talking about my aims and my research questions. And here it is. So here is the response. Constructivist grounded theory. Well done. Justification. So basically everything that we need. So it's a poorly understood under research phenomenon, which is brilliant. That's the first thing that usually comes to mind when you think about grounded theory. It prioritizes these under-researched phenomena. And then a whole bunch of other things, understanding subjective experiences. Arguably this is, this sits more than just grounded theory, but there's a few good arguments here, I would say. Constructivist grounded theory. It's interesting because it's not just grounded theory, it's in fact constructivist grounded theory, which is exactly what I did. And then, most importantly, why not phenomenology or ethnography? This is interesting as well. Phenomenology and grounded theory seem to overlap so much. People often are confused, and I often read studies where one or the other has been chosen, and then I feel like the other one should have been chosen. I have a video where I compare phenomenology and grounded theory. They can be similar. There are similarities, but so I like how it's actually explaining why it doesn't fully fit phenomenology. I remember having these problems and struggling with them as I was planning my study. So it's definitely useful because then it helps to also talk about other approaches a little bit. When you provide arguments for your choice of methodology, it's always useful to show some understanding of other options. And then, of course, at the end, supporting literature, which is also helpful, especially if you're writing about it. So that's a very helpful addition. In fact, Charmas is one of my favorite books and where I learned about constructivist grounded theory. And then what else? Considerations and refinement. So some more questions, just like we had, like what we saw in the previous one about worldviews and paradigms. So it's asking me questions I could engage further because, of course, and again, you have to be careful. What if it wasn't a grounded theory? So it's asking me questions about these things. Since I've done this study, I know the answers. Maybe you don't know how you created your codes because you haven't. But as you can see, again, it's the first response, the first attempt. It's absolutely brilliant and mind-blowing, although some people don't like that expression. It's absolutely brilliant, the work it's done just following this one simple prompt. Just imagine engaging with it further and drafting your response. And now finally, validity, another one. So I mentioned it's on my list. Validity as well as philosophical paradigms, worldviews. There are 2 out of 3 things on the list of most confusing, vague, and difficult questions in qualitative research. I said that many times in the past in other videos. Another thing on that list is the number of participants in a qualitative study. We won't be addressing it here. But the question of validity is definitely a confusing one. There are, again, so many different classifications and categories and opinions on what is validity in qualitative research. So it definitely helps to be able, again, to bounce some ideas back and forth and maybe get some ideas for how you can address validity of your study. Again, based not on theoretical discussions, based on actual data about your study. That's important because, of course, it will be tailored to your specific study. So I haven't even read the response just yet, but you can see, again, I used the published article. I said, here's my research design. Because that's mainly what's important. So what I did in my study, based on this, we can say how we can ensure validity. And then at the end is my prompt. So based on my research design, list strategies I can use to increase the validity of my findings. If anything about the design is unclear, feel free to ask follow-up questions, tailor the strategies to fit the specifics of my study, and support each suggestion with relevant literature. So here we go. We have different ideas. Triangulation. And as you can see, it's already tailored to my study because it's explaining actually how it is tailored to my study. So it's telling me that I'm already collecting data from different sources, which means, there is this triangulation. Brilliant. What if I didn't know that? Maybe I didn't know that I actually have triangulation, which is already a step towards better validity of the findings, and some more. So we have a long list. Member check-in, one of my favorite ways to increase validity. Now it's giving me suggestions that I can reach out to my participants and engage in member checking. Again, I do have a video, maybe here, about validity and different ways in which you can increase validity of your study. Reflexivity and positionality, again, very popular things or concepts in qualitative research. Peer debriefing, so a whole bunch of things, really. You don't have to do all these things in your study, but they are things to choose from, and many of them are already underlying what you do. So it's useful to know. Again, thick description, for example, detailed audit trail, or triangulation. Quite often you already have it. You just need to know. These are actually things to pay attention to and highlight when you talk about in your response about validity of your findings. So you can see more things here, including pilot testing. So another thing that quite often gets overlooked is we do know that we need a pilot study, but not everybody thinks about it as one of the most common tools for ensuring validity. Anyway, you can see it's all tailored. Again, it's all tailored to this specific study. And this is it. I hope that you learned something new. Please like the video and help others find it. If you enjoyed it, if you enjoyed the content, if you learned something new, consider subscribing if you're new around here. And I'll see you in the next one.